Hello. So, a couple of months ago, I made a video speaking about Gregg Wallace and about allegations that had come about as a result of several people coming forwards and having some very serious words against Gregg Wallace's conduct towards a lot of female contestants on the show. And this has resulted in the infamous expression that Gregg Wallace has used of middle-aged women of a certain age. A comment that has gone down absolutely like milk, and one that, unfortunately for Gregg, nobody actually believes. Nobody believed him for 1 second, and the option to double down and go on the offensive in times like this, the counterattack, if you will, has not worked. In fact, I would say it's backfired so spectacularly. I would have suggested that Gregg Wallace would not only never work for the BBC ever again after what's just happened, but I would suspect that, well, people will move on and Gregg Wallace's time in the spotlight has finally come to an end in disgrace. Except we're not even done yet, because 6 months have passed by, and now that apparently we're now over 50 people have come forward with allegations of inappropriate behaviour, misconduct against Gregg Wallace. And what has Gregg Wallace decided to do? He's decided to he's done several things since this. He said he's not going to jeopardise his reputation for 21 years of loyal service to the BBC, but then immediately starts lambasting the BBC by saying it gives a very blatant and one-sided approach to journalism, which, to be honest, that's not true. And you want to know why it's not true. In fact, not only is it not true, but what's that got to do with what Gregg Wallace is doing? What exactly is Gregg hoping to get out of this? Is he going to drag David Dimbleby, Laura Kursberg, Jeremy Paxman into all this because he doesn't think that they're fair or biased? What for, Gregg? How do you think pulling them into it is going to save your own skin? Which, realistically, you would have thought that's absolutely what Gregg would have been doing. If I was Gregg Wallace, the very first moment I heard of such allegations, I would have squared it with the Abbey. I would have settled the score immediately. Because when you don't, and when you double down, and you just straight up say, you know what, middle-class women of a certain age, is how things escalate, and how it looks very, very hard to actually not only align yourself with Gregg into believing he's innocent, but to be honest, Gregg, I don't even think Gregg has even said at any point he was actually ever innocent anyway. Surprisingly enough, ladies and gentlemen, go back to when all these allegations first started. Has Gregg ever actually said he was innocent? What was the very first thing he did when all of this was coming to light? That's what I want to know. Because, to be honest, I don't think it was, that he was innocent and that he could explain exactly what was going on. I sincerely doubt that's what was happening. And then he starts throwing his autism into this. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll actually pull up the quote right now, just so we can square it, so we know exactly what exactly he's said. Okay, so my neurodiversity, now formally diagnosed as autism, was suspected and discussed by colleagues across countless seasons of MasterChef. Yet nothing was done to investigate my disability or protect me from what I now realise was a dangerous environment for over 20 years. Right, okay, you know what, let's tear this down brick by brick, shall we? First of all, my neurodiversity, now formally diagnosed as autism, was suspected and discussed by colleagues across countless seasons of MasterChef. Right, okay, few things. First of all, I thought MasterChef was a cooking competition, and Gregg is not really... Gregg is a judge, he's a presenter, but he's not the focus of the show. why, unless on screen, why would Gregg Wallace's autism be the focus of a cooking competition? And to be honest, I've watched like at least 3 series of Masterchef from when I was 11 till I was 13 years old. If I'm being honest, I don't think it was ever a factor before or afterwards. So why is this something that's being brought up now? Now, if we want to go for the idea that this is something that was known behind the scenes, that still doesn't make any sense. And I'll explain why when we get to the next part. Yet nothing was done to investigate my disability or protect me from what I now realise was a dangerous environment for over 20 years. First of all, nothing was done to investigate. Why, Greg? First of all, let me just and this probably might be the most controversial thing I've had to say all year. But listen, investigate my disability, Greg. Your autism is not a disability. A disability, insofar as I can work out, is when you are mentally or physically unable to actually do something. The idea of, well, at least my interpretation of disability is when you can't actually do something, or you physically or mentally or otherwise, you actually can't do it. And I don't ever once recall there was anything on the show that Greg couldn't do before or afterwards. I mean, what am I supposed to think about stuff like that? Am I meant, because listen, I have Asperger's myself, but guess what? At no point did I ever say, you know what, that was my blank space. That was my get out of jail free card. So I can say I can say whatever I want about anyone else. I can touch anyone I wanted to touch, and it didn't matter jack what they had to say or not. Greg, it's not a get out of jail free card. And guess what? There are plenty of people who can actually go through life with autism, with Asperger's, with any other neurological condition whatsoever, and they are perfectly square and capable with the Abbey. They can follow the law. And guess what? It's even a thing in this country. You know what? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. And no, Greg, you do not have that privilege. There's no privilege to be spoke of, because why on earth are you trying to say that's the more you think about it, the more ridiculous it sounds. And to be honest, it's a tremendous slap in the face for people who absolutely know better, and they've done nothing but demonstrate that they know better by staying within the law and not actually doing anything to break the law. Because then the next question would follow for Greg is that whether or not the things he's done, and if these allegations are to be believed, then it's possible that Greg has broken some sort of law. Because if we're going to go for the idea of law, well, let me just paraphrase this again. Or protect me from what I now realise. Okay, so what I now realise. So, passage of time. It wasn't 5 years ago that you realised. It wasn't 10 years or 15 years. Now. Now is the word we're using. So, you've only now realised. Oh, by the way, let's just go through this again. I'm doing this again. Protect me for what I now realise was a dangerous environment. Yeah. A dangerous environment you caused, Greg. Don't blame it. And what? Okay, so listen. This is the underlying problem I've had since all of this began. You want to know what it is? Throughout this entire hullabaloo about Greg and whether or not he genuinely believes he can double down and say it wasn't my fault. Middle class women of a certain age, it's their fault. It's my autism's fault. He has gone from like a feeble Jacob Rees-Mogg approach. Now he's gone into straight up Chris Chan territory in terms of baiting with his autism. And you want to know why that is? Because just like Chris Chan, Greg genuinely cannot say sorry. That's the one thing he's not done. The only thing he should have done, the only thing I would have done, and I suspect all of you would have done, if these things were true. And that, to be honest, it would have saved Gregg a lot of trouble. It may not have saved his job, but he can at least maintain his dignity. And that is to apologize, to say sorry, because that's just what you do, in my opinion. The mark of real maturity is that when you do actually have to say sorry, when you do know it, when you get things wrong. And, well, it may just come down to the fact that, to be honest, Gregg probably doesn't even think he's even done anything wrong. That might be the underlying cause of all of this. Gregg genuinely feels like he's in the right for one very specific reason. It's probable that Gregg Wallace is just malicious. He knows fine. I don't believe this whole he knows now. He knew way back when that the things he said and the things I've heard from other people about what he's done. And there's going to be more coming. This is not going to be the end of it. In 6 months' time, we could be nearly up to 150 complaints against Gregg Wallace. And it won't stop. I think 50 is a conservative estimate, or underestimate, I should say. But as I said before, Gregg Wallace is malicious because he knows fine well what he's done was wrong, and guess what? He doesn't care, because as long as he gets away with it, that's all that matters. Unfortunately for Gregg, you don't get away with this sort of thing. Gregg may think in some way that he can, but you don't get away with it forever. Sooner or later, justice will prevail, and we have a system in this country, and it should be a system that pretty much the rest of the world should follow, is that it's a system where justice is served, where the innocent are freed and the guilty are punished. Sounds so simple. Maybe not to everybody it sounds that simple. And just to wrap this up in the case of Gregg Wallace, because I suspect in 6 months' time I'll be talking about this again, but I don't ever want to hear him, bring up neurodiversity or autism as an excuse for this sort of behavior ever again. Because if I didn't believe it now, I'm certainly not going to believe it down the line. And you know what, Gregg? Best of luck if you so happen to be watching this. You're probably not, because fine. You can tell 13 minutes into this, I've not had very, very nice things to say about you. Well, what do you expect, Gregg? This is you reap what you sow. So, I think, as you used to say on Masterchef, you are cooked, my son.